Thank you for clicking in this video. In today's video, a man's curiosity led him to the darkest corners of the internet, but what he found was far beyond what he ever imagined. Package arrives, and with it, a deadly game begins. Will he escape, or is it already too late? Stay with us and uncover the chilling truth behind the deep web packet.
I've always had a taste for the obscure, the unseen corners of the internet where most people wouldn't dare to tread. It started with harmless curiosity, reading about urban legends, conspiracy theories, and the occasional bizarre news story. But the deep web, it was a whole different beast. A place where anonymity reigns and where you can find anything if you're willing to pay the price. One late night, my curiosity got the better of me. I'd heard whispers of a site buried deep within the layers of the dark web that offered exclusive experiences. The kind of experiences you couldn't find anywhere else. Experiences that were tailored to you. I didn't believe it, of course. I thought it was just another urban legend, a story made to spook the gullible. But something about the idea nagged at me, tugged at the darkest parts of my mind. I couldn't resist. I navigated through the labyrinth of links, following the cryptic instructions I'd found on a forum dedicated to deep web explorers. Finally, I arrived. The site was simple, almost too simple, just a black background with a single line of text. Ready for something different? Below it was a button that read Enter. My heart pounded as I clicked the button. What followed was a series of cryptic questions, nothing too personal, just enough to get a sense of who I was. I answered each one, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and dread. Then, the screen went blank for what felt like an eternity before a new page loaded. There it was, the offer. For a hefty sum of Bitcoin, they promised to deliver an experience unlike any other. A package that will change your life, it said. I hesitated. The price was steep, but I had some savings stashed away, and the thrill of the unknown was too tempting. What could possibly go wrong? It was just a game, I told myself. A sick, twisted game, but a game nonetheless. I clicked purchase and watched as my Bitcoin balance dropped. A confirmation message appeared, telling me to expect delivery within 48 hours. That was it. No tracking number, no details about the contents, just a cold, clinical confirmation. For the next 2 days, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. What had I gotten myself into? But as the hours passed, my anxiety gave way to anticipation. I was about to experience something unique, something no one else I knew had the guts to try. Then, on the evening of the second day, a knock on my door shattered the quiet of my apartment. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the sound sent a shiver down my spine. I peeked through the peephole, but no one was there. Confused, I opened the door, and that's when I saw it, a plain, unmarked package sitting on my doorstep. It was small, wrapped in brown paper, and completely nondescript. There was no return address, no label, nothing to indicate where it had come from. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, and a strange, metallic odor wafted from the paper. I brought it inside, my heart racing. This was it. The package from the deep web. The beginning of my exclusive experience. But as I set it on the table and stared at it, the excitement that had driven me to this point began to morph into something else, something far darker. I was no longer sure I wanted to know what was inside. But it was too late. There was no going back now. I stared at the package for what felt like hours, debating with myself whether to open it or leave it sealed. The rational part of my mind screamed at me to throw it away, to forget this ever happened. But the other part, the part that had driven me to the dark corners of the internet in the first place, was too intrigued to resist. I had to know what was inside. Finally, with a deep breath, I reached for the package. The brown paper was rough to the touch, crinkling under my fingers as I carefully peeled it away. Underneath was a plain black box, as unmarked as the wrapping had been. No logo, no text, just a simple, matte surface. I hesitated again, my hand hovering over the box's lid. Every instinct told me to stop, but I forced myself to continue. Slowly, I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a small, intricately carved wooden box. It looked old, the kind of craftsmanship that belonged to another era. The wood was dark, almost ebony, with strange symbols etched into the surface. Symbols I didn't recognize, but that filled me with an inexplicable sense of dread. I lifted the box out of the velvet lining, feeling the weight of it in my hands. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, and the wood was cold, almost unnaturally so. I ran my fingers over the carvings, trying to decipher their meaning, but they were unlike anything I'd ever seen. There was no lock, no visible way to open it. I turned it over in my hands, searching for a seam, a hidden latch, something. And then I found it, a small, almost imperceptible button on the underside. My heart skipped a beat as I pressed it, and with a soft click, the lid of the box popped open. Inside, there was no treasure, no mysterious artifact. Just a single, folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age. I unfolded it with trembling hands, revealing a message written in elegant, flowing script. "You have invited it in." I read the words over and over, my mind struggling to process them. Invited what in? Was this some kind of sick joke? My skin crawled with unease, and for the first time, I regretted my decision to order from that damned site. I felt like a fool, like I'd fallen for some elaborate prank. But then, I noticed something. The air in the room felt different. Heavier. The temperature had dropped, and I could see my breath misting in front of me. A sense of foreboding settled over me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned around, my eyes scanning the room. Everything looked the same, my cluttered desk, the unmade bed, the faint glow of my computer screen. But something was off, something I couldn't quite place. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a shadow, darker than the rest, lingering in the far corner of the room. It wasn't moving, just standing there, silent and still. But the longer I stared at it, the more I became convinced it was watching me. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing down, the air thickening with an oppressive weight. I blinked, and the shadow was gone. But the unease remained, gnawing at my nerves, setting every instinct on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line, that I had brought something into my life that I didn't understand, something dangerous. I tried to calm myself, rationalizing that it was just my imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew that whatever I had invited in, it was real. And it was only just beginning. That night, sleep eluded me. My mind replayed the events of the day over and over, the package, the strange note, the unsettling feeling that had settled in my gut. I lay in bed, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling as shadows from passing cars danced across the walls. Every creak of the apartment, every rustle of the wind outside, seemed amplified, distorted by my growing unease. It was just a package, I kept telling myself, just some bizarre, creepy prank. But that didn't stop the thoughts from swirling in my head. What if it wasn't a prank? What if this was something more sinister? I forced myself to breathe slowly, to calm my racing heart. I was being ridiculous, letting my imagination run wild. But the sense of being watched lingered, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck that refused to go away. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in on me, the room shrinking, suffocating. I tossed and turned, trying to find a comfortable position, but sleep wouldn't come. I couldn't stop thinking about the words on the parchment, "You have invited it in." What had I invited in? What did that even mean? The phrase played on a loop in my mind, each repetition tightening the knot of anxiety in my chest. When I finally drifted off, my sleep was anything but restful. I dreamed of faceless figures watching me from the shadows, of being trapped in a room with no doors, no windows, just the oppressive weight of unseen eyes bearing down on me. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding, the sheets damp with sweat. The room was pitch dark, save for the faint glow of my clock. 3:13 a.m. I tried to shake off the remnants of the nightmare, but the unease clung to me, a heavy, invisible weight. I sat up in bed, running a hand through my hair, trying to steady my breathing. And then I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound. A rustling, like something brushing against fabric. I froze, every nerve in my body on high alert. The sound was faint, coming from somewhere near the foot of the bed. My pulse quickened as I strained to listen, to pinpoint its source. My eyes darted around the room, but in the darkness, everything looked distorted, the shadows taking on strange, unsettling shapes. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks on me after a night of fitful sleep. But the rustling continued, persistent, unnerving. I reached over and flicked on the bedside lamp, flooding the room with warm light. The shadows retreated, and the room looked normal again, cluttered, familiar. But the sound stopped, as if whatever had been causing it didn't want to be seen. I got out of bed and checked the room, opening the closet, looking under the bed, nothing out of place, no sign of anything unusual. But the silence that followed was oppressive, almost too quiet. It was as if the apartment itself was holding its breath, waiting. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was letting my imagination get the better of me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the package had set something in motion that I didn't understand. I decided to stay up, too on edge to even think about going back to sleep. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat on the couch, trying to make sense of it all. Maybe it was just nerves, maybe the stress of everything had finally gotten to me. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The package had brought something into my life, something I couldn't quite grasp. It wasn't a ghost or a demon, it was worse. It was the creeping realization that I was no longer in control, that someone, somewhere, was pulling the strings. And I had no idea who they were or what they wanted. As the first light of dawn crept through the blinds, I knew one thing for certain: I was being watched. And whoever was watching me knew exactly how to push my buttons, to keep me on edge, to make me question everything. I had played with fire, and now I was going to get burned. The following day, I was a wreck. Sleep deprived and jittery, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my bones. My apartment, once a refuge, now felt like a cage. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant hum of the city outside, seemed like a sign that something was terribly wrong. I tried to go about my usual routine, hoping normalcy would bring some comfort. I showered, had breakfast, and sat down at my desk to work. But my thoughts kept drifting back to the package, the note, and the strange events of the night before. I couldn't focus, couldn't concentrate. My mind was in 1,000 places at once, all of them dark and unsettling. Around midday, I decided to check my email, hoping to find something that would distract me. But as I scrolled through the usual spam and work messages, one email caught my eye. The subject line was blank, and the sender was just a random string of numbers and letters. Normally, I would have deleted it without a second thought, but something about it made me pause. I clicked on it. The email contained no text, just an attachment. A video file. My stomach churned as I stared at the screen, my cursor hovering over the play button. Every instinct told me not to open it, to delete it and forget I'd ever seen it. But curiosity, or maybe something darker, won out. I clicked play. The video was shaky, as if it had been filmed on a cheap phone camera. The first few seconds showed nothing but static, and then the screen flickered to life. The scene was dark, the only light coming from a dim street lamp in the distance. The camera panned slowly, revealing a narrow alleyway lined with dumpsters and graffiti-covered walls. I didn't recognize the location, but it had the distinct look of a place you didn't want to be alone in after dark. The camera continued to pan until it stopped on a figure standing at the far end of the alley. The person was dressed in dark, nondescript clothing, their face obscured by a hood. They stood still, facing the camera, unmoving. Something about their posture was unnerving, like they were waiting for something. Or someone. I leaned in closer, trying to make out more details, but the video quality was poor, grainy, and pixelated. For a long moment, nothing happened. The figure just stood there, staring into the camera, or maybe through it. And then, without warning, they started to walk toward the camera, their movements slow and deliberate. My heart rate spiked as I watched them approach. There was something off about the way they moved, too smooth, almost robotic. As they drew closer, I could see their hands tucked into their pockets, their face still hidden in shadow. The closer they got, the more the sense of dread grew in my chest. When they were just a few feet from the camera, the figure stopped again. They reached into their pocket and pulled out something small and dark. The video was too blurry to make out what it was, but the gesture alone sent a shiver down my spine. The figure held the object out toward the camera, as if offering it to me. Then they spoke. Their voice was low and distorted, like it had been altered to conceal their identity. But the words were clear. "You've been chosen." The screen went black. I sat there, staring at the blank screen, my mind racing. Chosen for what? And by whom? My hands were trembling, my mouth dry. I tried to rationalize what I had just seen, tried to convince myself that it was just some sick joke, a prank to mess with me. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Whoever had sent me that video knew something about me, something I didn't want to think about. And the fact that they had my email, that they could reach me like this, meant that this wasn't just some random prank. This was targeted. Deliberate. The phrase from the note echoed in my mind, "You have invited it in." I had done this to myself. I had opened the door, and now, whatever was on the other side had stepped through. And it wasn't going to leave until it had what it wanted. I shut down my computer, my mind racing with questions and fears. The apartment felt suffocating, the walls too close, the air too thick. I needed to get out, to clear my head, to figure out what the hell was happening. But as I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter where I went, I wouldn't be alone. The air outside was crisp, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement as I stepped onto the street. My mind was a tangled mess of fear and confusion, but one thing was clear: I needed to move. Staying in my apartment felt like surrendering to whatever was hunting me, and I wasn't ready to give in. As I walked, I kept glancing over my shoulder, paranoia gripping me tighter with each step. Every passerby seemed like a potential threat, every shadow hiding something sinister. The video had shaken me, but it was more than that. I could feel eyes on me, watching, waiting. I turned down a side street, hoping to lose myself in the labyrinth of the city. The buildings loomed tall, casting the narrow street in deep shadow. My footsteps echoed off the walls, the sound sharp in the stillness. I needed to think, to figure out what was happening and how to stop it. But my thoughts were interrupted by a noise behind me, a soft footfall, almost imperceptible, but there. I quickened my pace, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But the sound followed, growing louder, more insistent. Someone was following me. My pulse quickened, and adrenaline surged through my veins as I turned another corner, my breath coming faster. But no matter how quickly I moved, the footsteps kept pace, closing in on me. Panic set in, and I broke into a run. My heart pounded in my chest as I dashed through the streets, dodging pedestrians, weaving between cars. The city blurred around me, a chaotic whirlwind of sights and sounds. I didn't know where I was going, just away from whoever was behind me. But they didn't stop. The footsteps were faster now, more determined, like a predator closing in on its prey. I glanced back and caught a glimpse of a dark figure, their face hidden under a hood, moving with terrifying speed. They were gaining on me. My lungs burned as I pushed myself harder, sprinting down an alleyway, hoping to lose them in the maze of narrow passages. But the figure followed, relentless, unstoppable. I could hear their breath now, harsh and ragged, mingling with my own. Just as I rounded another corner, I collided with someone, another person, as frantic as I was. We both stumbled, nearly falling, but I caught a glimpse of their face. It was a young woman, her eyes wide with terror, her clothes disheveled. She looked as if she'd been running for hours. "They're coming," she gasped, her voice a desperate whisper. Before I could respond, I heard the footsteps again, more than one pair this time. The sound echoed off the walls, filling the narrow alley with a cacophony of approaching danger. We had no time to think, no time to plan. We just ran. Side by side, we sprinted down the alley, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The city around us was a blur, the world narrowing to a single focus, escape. But the footsteps behind us multiplied, growing louder, closer. Whoever was chasing us wasn't alone. "They've been after me for days," the woman panted as we ran, her voice strained with fear. "I don't know how to stop them." Her words sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just some random attack, this was something bigger, something orchestrated. We were players in a game we didn't understand, a game where the rules were designed to keep us running, keep us afraid. Up ahead, the alley opened up into a busy street. We burst out into the open, the sudden rush of people and noise disorienting. But there was no time to stop, no time to blend in. The hunters were right behind us, closing in with every second. "This way," the woman shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward a subway entrance. We plunged down the stairs, the sound of our pursuers echoing off the tiled walls. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as we reached the platform, but the train wasn't there. We were trapped. I scanned the platform, desperate for a way out, but the only options were the tracks or the stairs back up. And we both knew going back wasn't an option. The footsteps grew louder, closer, a countdown to whatever fate awaited us. "They won't stop until they get what they want," the woman said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and resolve. "But we can't let them win." Before I could respond, the subway lights flashed, signaling an approaching train. But the footsteps were almost upon us. There was no time to wait. We had to make a decision, fight, hide, or run. But deep down, I knew one thing for certain: the game was far from over. The train screeched to a halt, the doors sliding open with a mechanical hiss. We didn't wait for an invitation. We leapt inside, pushing past startled commuters as we scrambled for the furthest corner of the car. The woman and I collapsed onto the seats, breathless, our bodies trembling from the relentless chase. But we weren't safe. Not yet. The doors slid shut, and the train lurched forward, plunging into the dark tunnel. The fluorescent lights inside flickered, casting eerie shadows over the passengers who now stared at us with a mixture of confusion and concern. I scanned the car, searching for any sign that the hunters had followed us, but all I saw were ordinary people, oblivious to the nightmare we were living. "We can't keep running," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the clatter of the train on the tracks. "They'll catch up eventually." The woman nodded, her eyes darting nervously around the car. "I know. I've tried hiding, running, even fighting back. Nothing works. They're always one step ahead." Her words hung in the air, heavy with despair. I felt the same hopelessness settling in, the realization that we were trapped in a game we couldn't win. But there had to be a way out, some loophole, some trick we hadn't thought of yet. The thought of surrendering, of letting these people control our fate, was unbearable. "Who are they?" I asked, my mind racing for answers. "What do they want?" She shook her head. "I don't know. They never speak, never explain. They just hunt. I think it's all a game to them, some sick, twisted form of entertainment." Her words made my skin crawl. We were pawns, pieces on a board manipulated by unseen hands. But every game has rules, even if they're hidden. If we could just figure out what those rules were, maybe we could find a way to break them. As the train hurtled through the tunnel, I forced myself to think, to analyze. The hunters were relentless, always closing in, never giving us a moment's rest. But they weren't infallible. We had made it this far, escaped death by a hair's breadth. That meant there had to be a way to outsmart them. What if we flipped the game on them? I suggested, my voice steadying as the idea began to take shape. What if we turned the hunters into the hunted? The woman looked at me, her eyes narrowing with a mix of skepticism and hope. "How?" "They're stronger, faster, and there's more of them. We don't even know how many." "Exactly," I said, leaning in closer. "They expect us to keep running, to be scared, to make mistakes. But what if we did the unexpected? What if we stopped running and started setting traps, leading them into dead ends?" She considered this, her fears slowly giving way to determination. "It's risky," she admitted. "But you're right. We can't keep playing by their rules. If we want to survive, we have to change the game." The train began to slow as we approached the next station. I could feel the tension in the air, a collective breath held by everyone in the car. We had only moments to make a decision, to choose our next move. I glanced out the window, watching the platform come into view. There were too many people, too many potential threats. But we couldn't stay on the train. Sooner or later, they would find us. "Next stop, we get off," I said. "But not at the platform. We'll jump onto the tracks and head for the maintenance tunnels. They won't expect that." She nodded, her jaw set with determination. "And then what?" "Then we find a way to turn this around," I said, hoping my voice sounded more confident than I felt. "We make them think they're still in control, but we'll lead them into our trap." The train slowed to a crawl, the station lights flickering through the windows. We stood, ready to move. The doors slid open, and the commuters began to file out. But we didn't follow. Instead, we moved to the emergency exit at the back of the car, prying it open just as the train came to a stop. With a quick glance at each other, we jumped onto the tracks, the cold metal rails sending a shock up my legs. The tunnel yawned before us, dark and foreboding, but it was our only chance. We took off, sprinting into the blackness, the sounds of the station fading behind us. As we ran, the air grew colder, the oppressive weight of the underground pressing down on us. The darkness was absolute, the only light coming from the occasional service bulb overhead. But we didn't slow down. We couldn't. "They'll realize we're down here soon," she panted, her voice echoing off the tunnel walls. "We need to find a place to hide, to regroup." I nodded, my eyes scanning the shadows for anything that could give us an advantage. A side tunnel, an alcove, anything. But all I saw was endless darkness and the faint glint of metal rails stretching into the abyss. Then, up ahead, I spotted it, a service door, barely visible in the dim light. We sprinted toward it, our hope renewed. I grabbed the handle and wrenched it open, revealing a narrow maintenance corridor. We ducked inside, slamming the door behind us. The corridor was cramped, the walls lined with pipes and electrical cables. But it was a hiding spot, a place to catch our breath and plan our next move. I leaned against the wall, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to steady my breathing. "They'll expect us to keep moving," I said, the gears in my mind turning. "But what if we stayed here, waited for them to pass, and then doubled back? We could lead them into a trap, maybe lure them into a part of the tunnels where we can control the environment." The woman nodded, a grim smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "It's dangerous. But at this point, it's the best shot we've got." We sat in the darkness, our breaths mingling in the cold air, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. The hunters were out there, somewhere in the tunnels, searching for us. But now, for the first time, we had a plan, a chance to fight back. The game wasn't over yet, and we were about to change the rules. The minutes stretched into an eternity as we huddled in the cramped maintenance corridor, waiting for the sound of footsteps that would signal the approach of our hunters. The air was thick with tension, every creak of the pipes and distant echo in the tunnels amplifying the pounding of my heart. We were ready, at least, that's what we told ourselves. But nothing could truly prepare us for what was coming. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound we dreaded, the soft shuffle of boots on the tracks. They were close. I exchanged a glance with the woman, her face pale in the dim light, but her eyes burning with determination. This was it. No more running. It was time to turn the tables. I peered through the narrow crack in the door, my breath catching as I saw two shadowy figures moving cautiously along the tunnel, their movements fluid and purposeful. They were like predators, confident in their hunt, unaware that their prey had decided to fight back. "Now," I whispered, gripping the door handle. The plan was simple, wait until they were right outside, then spring the trap. But plans have a way of falling apart, especially when fear and adrenaline mix in the worst possible way. The woman nodded, and we tensed, ready to strike. But just as I was about to pull the door open, my hand slipped, the sweat making my grip falter. The door creaked, a small sound, but enough to shatter the silence. The figures outside froze, their heads snapping toward the noise. Panic surged through me. We had lost the element of surprise. Without thinking, I threw the door open wide, barreling out with a shout, hoping to catch them off guard. The woman was right behind me, her own cry echoing through the tunnel. But instead of confusion, I saw only cold, calculated movement as the hunters drew their weapons, knives glinting in the dim light. One of them lunged at me, the blade slicing through the air toward my chest. I barely managed to twist out of the way, the knife grazing my side, pain flaring up but adrenaline keeping me moving. I retaliated, swinging wildly with a piece of broken pipe I'd picked up earlier. The metal connected with the hunter's arm, a sickening crack echoing in the tunnel, but it didn't slow him down. The other hunter was on the woman in an instant, the two of them grappling in a fierce struggle. She fought with a desperation that matched my own, her every move a testament to the sheer will to survive. But the hunters were relentless, skilled, and far too confident. "Run," she screamed, her voice cracking as she pushed the hunter back, giving herself just enough space to pull me away from the fight. I hesitated, torn between the need to escape and the instinct to fight. But she grabbed my arm, yanking me down the tunnel. We sprinted, the echoes of our footfalls bouncing off the walls, the darkness pressing in around us. I could hear the hunters close behind, their pace steady, never faltering. My mind raced, trying to think of our next move. The plan had failed. Our trap had been nothing more than a brief inconvenience to these seasoned killers. We rounded a corner, the tunnel splitting into two paths. Without thinking, we took the left, plunging into a narrower passage, the walls closing in as we ran. But as we pushed forward, the space grew tighter, the ceiling lowering until we were forced to duck, then crawl. It was a dead end. "Damn it!" I cursed, slamming my fist against the wall. There was no way out. The only option was to face them. At this time, we had no element of surprise, no advantage at all. The woman's breathing was ragged, her face twisted in fear and frustration. "We have to fight," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "If we're going down, we're taking them with us." I nodded, the weight of the situation sinking in. This was it, the end of the line. But as we turned to face our pursuers, something unexpected happened. The hunters slowed, their confident strides faltering as they approached the narrow passage. They hesitated, their eyes scanning the tight space, calculating the risk. They were used to open spaces, to having the upper hand. Here, in this claustrophobic corridor, they were at a disadvantage. They couldn't move as freely, couldn't use their numbers to overwhelm us. Realizing this, a grim determination settled over me. Maybe we couldn't win, but we could make them pay. I looked at the woman, and without a word, we prepared ourselves for the final stand. The first hunter moved forward, his knife leading the way. I swung the pipe with all my might, the narrow space amplifying the force behind the blow. The hunter's head snapped back, blood spraying as the metal connected with his skull. He dropped, his body convulsing on the ground. But the second hunter was quicker, dodging my next swing and slashing at my leg. Pain shot through me, but I didn't fall. I lunged at him, the confined space turning our struggle into a brutal, close-quarters fight. The woman joined in, her fists and feet flying as she attacked with a ferocity born of sheer survival instinct. Together, we managed to overpower him, forcing him against the wall. His knife fell to the ground, and I kicked it away, our breathing heavy, the adrenaline keeping us on our feet. For a moment, silence reigned. We had done it. We had turned the tables, if only for a moment. But the reality of our situation loomed large. We were still trapped, still hunted, and now we had blood on our hands. There was no going back. The woman looked at me, her eyes wide with fear and resolve. "They'll send more," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We need to find a way to end this. For good." I nodded, my mind racing. We couldn't keep running forever, and hiding was no longer an option. The only way out was to find the ones behind this game and take them down. But how? And where? The hunt was far from over. And the real monsters were still out there, watching, waiting for their next move. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the ragged breaths of the unconscious hunter and the whimpering of the other, who had dropped his bravado the moment we had him pinned against the wall. His face was twisted in pain and fear, blood trickling from a wound on his forehead where I'd struck him earlier. The woman and I stood over him, weapons raised, our hearts pounding in unison as we faced the grim reality of what needed to be done. We had one chance, one moment to end this nightmare. But the cost of that decision weighed heavily on us. Please, the conscious hunter begged, his voice trembling. I have kids. I didn't want to do this. They forced me. Please, don't hurt me. I just want to go home to my family. His words hit like a punch to the gut. My grip on the pipe faltered as doubt crept in. Could he be telling the truth? Or was this just another trick, a final attempt to escape the fate that he and his partner had been so eager to impose on us? The woman hesitated too, the fierce determination in her eyes giving way to uncertainty. He's lying, she said, her voice lacking the conviction she'd had moments ago. He's just trying to save himself. We can't trust him. I wanted to believe her, to maintain the resolve that had carried us this far. But the hunter's pitiful expression and desperate pleas gnawed at my conscience. What if he really did have a family waiting for him? What if we were about to cross a line we couldn't come back from? Please, he repeated, his voice cracking as tears welled in his eyes. I'll tell you everything. Just let me go. I'll walk away, I swear. I don't want to die. For a moment, we were frozen in place, caught between the need to survive and the fear of becoming something we despised. The woman glanced at me, her eyes searching for an answer I didn't have. Maybe we can use him, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He knows the others, knows how they think. He could help us take them down. The woman's jaw clenched, her eyes narrowing as she weighed my words. But before she could respond, the hunter took advantage of our hesitation. With a sudden, desperate burst of energy, he shoved me backward and bolted toward the woman, his hand lashing out to grab her by the throat. The speed of his attack caught us both off guard, and I stumbled, losing my grip on the pipe. Let me go, or she dies, the hunter snarled, his voice now filled with venomous rage. The pitiful mask had fallen away, revealing the cold, calculating killer beneath. The woman gasped, struggling against his grip, her hands clawing at his arm as he tightened his hold. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing to find a way out of this. The hunter's other hand fumbled for something in his pocket, and a second later, I realized with horror what he was doing. He was sending out a signal, alerting the others to our location. We're dead if we don't stop him, the woman choked out, her voice strained as she fought for air. I could see the fear in her eyes, the realization that we were running out of time. I lunged forward, grabbing the first thing I could, a jagged piece of metal from the ground, and drove it into the hunter's side with all the strength I could muster. His body jerked violently, his grip on the woman loosening as he let out a strangled cry of pain. I twisted the metal deeper, the sickening sound of flesh tearing making bile rise in my throat, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The hunter collapsed to the ground, clutching at the wound in his side, his eyes wide with shock and agony. He tried to speak, but only a gurgle of blood came out. His hand fell limp, the device he had used to give away our position slipping from his grasp. The woman staggered back, her hand clutching her throat as she gasped for air. I dropped the bloody piece of metal, my hands trembling as the reality of what I had done set in. The hunter's body twitched once, twice, then went still, the life draining from his eyes. For a moment, all I could do was stare, my mind numb from the violence of the encounter. We had won, at least this small battle, but the victory felt hollow. The woman's breathing was ragged, her face pale as she tried to regain her composure. She looked at me, her expression a mix of gratitude and horror. We have to keep moving, she whispered, her voice shaking. They know where we are now. We're out of time. I nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. There was no turning back, no time for regrets. We were in this until the end, and the only way out was through. The hunters would be coming, and they would be more ruthless than ever. But we had no choice. We had to end this game, no matter the cost. As we gathered ourselves and prepared to move, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were stepping into the final act of a nightmare that had only just begun. The acrid stench of burning flesh hung heavy in the air, a grotesque reminder of the violence that had just unfolded. We watched from the shadows as the remaining hunters arrived, their footsteps echoing ominously in the empty alley. The flames danced around the two bodies lying on the ground, casting eerie, flickering shadows against the walls. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest as the hunters approached the burning figures. Their leader, a tall man with a scarred face, knelt beside the corpses, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his reaction. "They're dead," one of the hunters muttered, peering over the leader's shoulder. "They burned themselves alive to avoid capture." The leader's eyes narrowed as he studied the charred remains. "Not so fast," he growled. "We need confirmation. They could be playing us." Another hunter pulled out a device, similar to the one the first man had used to transmit our location. He pressed a few buttons, his face illuminated by the cold blue glow of the screen. The seconds stretched into an eternity as we waited for the verdict. "No response from the others," the hunter finally said, his voice tense. "But the signal was sent from here. They must have panicked when they saw we were closing in. Looks like the game is over." The leader didn't look convinced, but he nodded slowly. "Get the truck ready. We'll sweep the area just in case, but if they really did this, we'll find their IDs in the ashes." As the hunters began their sweep, I felt a shiver of fear race down my spine. We had to move now, while they were still distracted. The woman beside me squeezed my arm, her eyes wide with the same urgency I felt. We slipped away, our footsteps barely a whisper on the pavement. We knew every alley, every shadowed corner of this part of the city. It was the only advantage we had left. Minutes later, we were in the back of an abandoned warehouse, hidden among piles of old crates and forgotten machinery. My chest heaved with every breath as the reality of our situation sank in. We had done the unthinkable, outsmarted our hunters in the most brutal way possible. But now we faced an even greater challenge, escaping this city and leaving everything behind. "We can't go back," the woman whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and resolve. "If they find out we're still alive, they'll come after us. And not just them, anyone involved in this twisted game knows who we are now. Our faces, our names, everything." I nodded, the weight of her words pressing down on me. The thought of never seeing my family again, of abandoning the life I'd built, was like a knife to the heart. But I knew she was right. The moment I had stumbled upon that website, my fate had been sealed. "We'll have to disappear," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "New names, new identities. We can't leave a trace." The woman nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "We'll have to stick together. We're all we've got now." The decision was agonizing, but there was no alternative. We had to leave everything behind, our families, our friends, our lives. And we had to do it quickly, before the hunters realized their mistake. We moved in silence, gathering what little we could carry. As we crept through the city's back streets, the reality of our situation grew heavier with each step. There was no turning back now. We were fugitives, and our survival depended on our ability to vanish without a trace. As we reached the city's edge, the woman turned to me, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. "Where do we go from here?" I stared into the distance, the dark horizon offering no answers. "We keep moving. We don't stop until we're sure they've given up. But even then, we can never let our guard down. We'll have to become ghosts." She nodded, her hands slipping into mine as we began the long walk into the unknown. But even as we left the city behind, a nagging sense of dread clung to me. The hunters might believe we were dead, but the real danger wasn't over. Somewhere out there, in the darkest corners of the web, others were watching, waiting. And as we disappeared into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the game was far from over. The road stretched out before us, a winding path through the unknown. We had left the city far behind, but the weight of what we'd done, and what might still be coming, hung over us like a storm cloud. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden threat. Every rustle in the bushes set our nerves on edge. We were free, but at what cost? We moved with purpose, sticking to back roads and avoiding any signs of civilization. It felt as though the entire world was against us, and maybe it was. The hunters might have believed they'd won, but deep down, I knew that our real enemies were far more insidious. We had stepped into a world where human life was just another commodity, where the thrill of the hunt was a currency traded in the darkest corners of the web. And now we were on the run from it. The woman, Sarah, as she had finally introduced herself, walked beside me, her face a mask of determination. We hadn't spoken much since leaving the city, both of us too focused on survival to dwell on the horrors we'd endured. But the silence between us was thick with unspoken fears and unanswered questions. As night fell, we found shelter in an old, abandoned farmhouse, its decaying walls providing a brief respite from the endless road. We lit a small fire, the warmth doing little to chase away the chill in our bones. I watched the flames dance, lost in thought, until Sarah's voice pulled me back to reality. "What if they're still out there?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What if they're just waiting for the right moment to strike?" I met her gaze, the fear in her eyes reflecting my own. "We can't live in constant fear," I said, though the words felt hollow. "We have to keep moving, keep one step ahead. But we can't let them control us, not anymore." Sarah nodded, though the uncertainty lingered. "And if they find us?" I hesitated, the question gnawing at the edges of my mind. "If they find us, we fight. But we can't let them win. We've already given up too much." The fire crackled between us, and for a moment, the weight of our situation seemed unbearable. But then Sarah reached out, her hand finding mine, grounding me in the present. We were in this together, and that was the only thing keeping us from being completely consumed by the darkness. The night passed slowly, every creak of the old house and every distant sound outside sending our nerves into overdrive. Sleep was a luxury we couldn't afford, not with the possibility of hunters, or worse, still out there. By the time dawn broke, we were exhausted but determined to keep going. We resumed our journey, the landscape around us shifting from dense forests to open plains, the emptiness making us feel even more exposed. But as the hours passed, something began to change. It was subtle at first, a sense that we were being watched, that unseen eyes were tracking our every move. The feeling grew stronger, more oppressive, until it was almost suffocating. "Do you feel that?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with anxiety. I nodded, scanning the horizon. "Yeah, we're not alone." We quickened our pace, trying to shake the sensation, but it only grew worse. It wasn't just paranoia, something was out there, tracking us like prey. And whoever, or whatever, it was, they were getting closer. By the time we reached a small, forgotten town, the tension had reached a breaking point. The streets were deserted, the buildings in various stages of decay, but the sense of danger was palpable. We ducked into an old diner, its dusty windows offering a limited view of the street outside. It was there, in the shadowed corner of that forgotten place, that we made a grim discovery. On one of the tables, scrawled in the dust, was a message, for simple words that sent a jolt of terror through me: "The game never ends." Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "They know we're here." I grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the back of the diner. "We have to keep moving. This isn't over." But even as we fled, the dread followed us. The hunters might have been left behind, but the real threat, the unseen force pulling the strings, was still out there. And as long as we were in its sights, we would never be truly free. The game wasn't over, and we were still players in it. But now, more than ever, we had to find a way to turn the tables before it was too late. The weeks that followed our narrow escape were a blur of exhaustion, fear, and a desperate need to stay ahead of the unseen threat. We managed to find passage across the border, blending in with the flow of people moving from one forgotten corner of the world to another. It wasn't easy. Every checkpoint, every moment of scrutiny felt like it could be our last, but somehow we made it through. Once we crossed the border, the first wave of relief washed over us. We had left behind the city that had become our nightmare, the hunters who had tried to end our lives, and the twisted game that had turned us into fugitives. But even as we found ourselves in a new country, the fear remained. The game had a reach far beyond what we could comprehend, and we knew it could still find us. We settled in a small, humble town, far removed from the chaos of our former lives. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where the biggest event was the weekly market in the town square. The people here were kind, welcoming in a way that felt almost alien after what we'd been through. For the first time in months, we began to feel a semblance of peace. Sarah and I kept a low profile, avoiding anything that might draw attention to ourselves. We didn't use the internet, didn't make calls or send emails. We paid in cash, used fake names, and did everything we could to erase our old identities. Slowly, as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, we started to believe that maybe, just maybe, we had escaped the game for good. We found work in the town, Sarah at a small cafe, and I doing odd jobs for the locals. The routine was comforting, a stark contrast to the constant danger we had faced. We even began to make friends, the neighbors treating us like family despite our quiet, reserved nature. There were moments when I could almost forget the horror of the past, when life felt normal. But in the back of my mind, there was always a lingering doubt. A nagging voice that reminded me of the message we had found in that diner: the game never ends. I pushed it aside, telling myself that we had done everything right, that we had finally found a way out. And for a while, it seemed to be true. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when everything changed. Sarah and I were sitting on the porch of our small house, enjoying the peaceful silence that had become so rare in our lives. The leaves were turning, a brilliant display of oranges and reds that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was the kind of day that made you believe in new beginnings. Then, the doorbell rang. We both froze, the sound cutting through the tranquility like a knife. My heart began to race, the old fear returning with a vengeance. For a moment, we just stared at each other, neither of us willing to move. "Maybe it's just a neighbor," Sarah whispered, though her voice trembled. I nodded, forcing myself to stand. "Yeah, maybe." I walked to the door, every step heavy with dread. When I opened it, there was no one there. Just a small, unmarked package sitting on the doorstep. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, the kind you might find at any post office. But something about it made my blood run cold. "Who could have left this?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I said, though I already had a sinking feeling in my gut. I bent down to pick up the package, my hands shaking as I turned it over. There was no return address, no markings at all. But the weight of it, the shape, was eerily familiar. As if on autopilot, I tore off the paper, revealing the box beneath. It was the same box we had received at the start of the nightmare. The same box that had plunged us into the sick, twisted game we had fought so hard to escape. No, Sarah's voice was filled with disbelief. It can't be. But it was. The reality of it hit us both at once, the horror of what it meant. We hadn't escaped. We had only delayed the inevitable. The game was still playing, and we were still its pawns. I opened the box with trembling hands, finding a single slip of paper inside. The words were printed in bold, black letters, the message simple but terrifying. The game never ends. We stared at the note in stunned silence, the weight of those words sinking in. The nightmare wasn't over. It was only just beginning.
If you want to watch another story, there is another video appearing on your screen now. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more spine-chilling stories.